September 9th, 2022. We're at a place known as Culver Hill on Route 22 in Beekmantown. When we first started covering this ceremony more than 2 decades ago, there used to be a monument buried in those trees there along the wall that was put up in the late 1800s, as I recall. But when the state was doing some road work, they talked to the right people and they got this little park here established. And for the past couple of decades, we've been enjoying this location, at least a decade and a half, I would guess. So it's the Battle of Culver Hill commemorated, and we're going to let them tell you all about it when the program gets going. Mr. Tatro and Dr. Walker are busy serenading the crowd as we approach the 11 a.m. start. John Rocks here is in full regalia. This is the monument that was buried in the brush alongside the road. You had to really be looking for it in order to see it. It was there from the time it was dedicated, which is I think something in the 1890s here. It's like 1894 until sometime in the last couple of decades, sometime in the early 2000s would be my guess. We started covering Battle of Plattsburgh stuff back in 1997, and that was before they started the annual parade. There's Gary Van Cor, about to get the show on the road.
Can everybody hear me out there? I'd like to get started. First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for coming. It's a beautiful day. I have to say I missed putting up my little pop-up tents because we've done that on more than one occasion. I'm Gary Van Cor, the town historian, and I'm going to kind of MC the day. And when I looked at John, the Commodore over there, I thought, there's no way that I can herd him to a certain spot. You know, John is a free spirit. He goes where he wants to go, and we're glad he's here. We're going to start off with the flag ceremony today, which would be, we have the Star Spangled Banner, which is the 15 stars, 15 stripes, the flag that was flying over Fort McHenry, and for which our national anthem got its start as a poem by Francis Scott Key. So we're going to have Boy Scouts here. We have Troop 46 from the Beekmantown Troop, and we have Troop 39 from Plattsburgh, and they will do the Pledge of Allegiance.
All right. What do we got? We're doing the pledge here. All right. Whoops. That fellow's going to wander off. Whoops. I guess he's not going to make the Scouts. Future Cub Scout. But he ain't there yet.
Salute our hands over heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Nice job, gentlemen.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Norm Davis, who's the town supervisor for the town of Beekmantown. Norm?
I'd like to thank everybody for coming. It's a beautiful day. We're here to commemorate the battle that took place here at Culver Hill. It played an important part of the Revolutionary War, the fight for our people to have the right to elect their own leaders. A lot of sacrifices were made at this spot in that effort. I urge you, if you haven't registered to vote, please do so. Register for whatever party you want. But do not let the sacrifices that these people made go unheard. On election day, vote for the candidate of your choice, but please vote. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce someone who probably doesn't need introduction because every time you look around the North Country, he's there. I asked him the other day, where do you live? Because you're always on the road, you're always here. And that is our Assemblyman, Billy Jones.
Thank you, Gary, and I'm going to keep this very brief because Mark Henry just informed me that he has a 27-page speech, and I'm sure you all want to get to that. But honestly, as was mentioned, as Norm mentioned, there's so much history around the area here, and we're going to go to ceremonies all weekend long, but this is a very important one. And I want to thank Gary and his team and all the volunteers, everyone that comes out for this year after year. It's really a pleasure, and I become a student here because I listened to Gary tell us the history of this area and tell us what happened and how important this was to the efforts. And we can never forget what that effort did for us in the battle and in the war here. And I want to thank our British counterparts, from the UK, for coming here. They're back this year,
of course.
and very important to have them here as well to show that enemies can come together and people can come together for the common good and human decency. But it is a very important, there is very important history here that was made, and Gary's going to bring us all through it like he does every year. And it's very, very important to our young and to everyone that we keep this history alive and keep the stories moving, that we can keep educating future generations on what happened and how important that was to all the efforts. And always remember the brave soldiers that sacrificed for us. So thank you very much for being here, and I want to thank everybody that's been involved in this throughout the years. Every year we come here, we come to honor our beloved veterans, and we come to honor each other for the sacrifice that they all made. So thank you very much for being here.
You mentioned the British, and of course yesterday, as we're recording this, was the day that Queen Elizabeth II passed away.
Thank you, Billy. Anybody who comes here knows that if I like you, I pick on you. You are all well loved. Now, speaking of that, I can hear voices behind me. One time Mark came and I didn't have him speak. And that's all I heard about, over and over. So I said, but I'll mention your name at least 3 times. I mentioned his name 3 times, and then Billy said, well, how come I didn't get mentioned 3 times? So, you just can't satisfy them. And without any further ado, the chairman of our county legislature and our representative from Beekman, this is Mark Henry.
Thank you, Gary. I wonder why I come here every year. Every year it's the same thing. I want to thank Gary, as we all should and do, for all of the efforts that he has made. I want to thank Norm and the town of Beekman for all of the continued work that they have done. I certainly want to thank the Boy Scouts for being here, Mark Sands and his crew. we're here today not just to remember what occurred here. Because to remember, I don't think, does justice to those that were here that day. To remember is simply to recall. I think we're here more to commemorate what happened that day, to honor what happened that day. And we are rightfully here to do that, to appreciate their hardships, their fears, and for some, those that paid the ultimate sacrifice. While in the large scheme of things, this was a relatively small skirmish, which was part of a much larger battle, that itself was part of an even wider conflict taking place on a world stage, conducted by world powers. The sacrifices made here on that day are no less important than those that were made during larger battles. And while wars are almost always about world powers and the movements of thousands of troops and navies, one cannot help but think of the individuals who participated in this skirmish here. And we'd be remiss if we didn't do that today. For ultimately, this is what all battles come down to: the individual, that square foot of land that you're standing on. For the individual soldier or sailor, doing their best to do their job, to not let their squad down, to not let their friends down, to not be overcome by fears. I think the prayers of a combatant are, please let me be safe, and please let me not fail. And it's to those individuals, especially those that fell here today, that we are here to honor. I think our reenactors play a large part in that, in helping us to understand what it was like. And their presence, the reenactors' presence here today, help us commemorate this event with some understanding of their hardship. And if I might just take a moment, I'd like to thank the Assemblyman for his efforts on helping to solve the problem of reenactors and their antique firearms. Thank you for that. We appreciate it very much. It is always good to look back at history, for there are many lessons to be learned there. I believe, and it's often said, that you cannot ignore the lessons of history, and if you do, it's at your peril. I think one of the lessons that can be learned here today is that two great nations who are locked in combat have become the best of friends and allies. There were many reasons for that change, and I won't attempt to explain them all here today. But the War of 1812 and the skirmish here at Culver Hill was a starting point for 208 years of unbroken friendship. There are lessons here that we can all learn and appreciate. So let us commemorate, honor if you will, those individuals who sacrificed all so many years ago. Let us commemorate this battle and this skirmish and recognize the importance in the events of the world at that time and our place in it. And let us particularly celebrate that for 208 years, our two countries have remained steadfast friends and allies. One of the most touching things that I saw, and it's been on Facebook again recently, and you may have seen it. I saw it when it happened, and you may well have as well. The Coldstream Guards have changing of the guard for the Queen. And this was shortly after September 11th and the events there. I think it was on like September 13th. And the Coldstream Guards, I believe in front of Buckingham Palace, played the national anthem. It was very touching. It was very appreciative by all of us here in the United States. So we come to this as great friends, great allies, and only separated, as George Bernard Shaw said, by a common language. So thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Okay, Mark. Next year, Mark is going to be the main speaker because he did such a great job.
Thank you. I like the copy.
I was told by more than one person, whatever you do, keep it short. Now the person sitting over there nodding her head vehemently that she's the one who was the most recent. And that's pretty much impossible. But what I did was I eliminated other speakers. Mark, you went over your time limit. Before I talk about the stone by the side of the road, and I hope that piqued your curiosity, what is he talking about? I'd like to recognize some of the people that are here are going to be mentioned as I recount that story. But on the program, you'll see a picture of what the hill looked like to the north. Unfortunately, with a copying machine, it's not as light as I wanted it. But this was from a sketch done in 1869 as a fellow by the name of Benson Lossing followed the path of the British. And that's what it looked like in 1869. And if you look inside, there's another sketch of a house. And that was the first bloody encounter, which is just north of here. That's where the British first came upon the Americans. And that's where the first blood was drawn on September 6th of 1814. It wasn't a very successful stand by the Americans, but at the time, a fellow by the name of John Wool, Major John Wool, with 250 regulars had come out and met the 500 militia there. And if you ever met the British Army charging at you, they don't stop. And most of the militia who were farmers or whoever just came thought this was not a good idea, and they went to do other things that were more important, like tend to their crops. So by the time they got to Culver Hill here, the stone walls, there were stone walls on both sides of the road at the time, were a protection, and Wool set up a place to make another stand. He knew he wouldn't stop the British Army. There were over 10,000 of them when they started across the border. There were over 4,000 marching down this road. He's not going to stop them with 250 guys behind a wall. But he wanted to at least let them know that they were here, to make them pause and wonder, okay, how many more are around the next bend? So the picture on the inside and the brief description is the Ira Howe house, which was down at the first encounter and was standing then and still stands today. And if you happen to want to take a look, just go up where the cemetery is, up the Ashley Road just a tiny bit, and there's another panel there, and it describes what happened. On the back, and this is always dangerous because it fluctuates, but on the back I always want to recognize the variety of people that have made this event possible. And we really could have 2 or 3 legal tablets full of pages full of names if we went into detail. But I want to recognize the 410 family, because without the 410 family allowing this land to become a park from their farm, we wouldn't be here today. The Lions Club, both the Beekmantown and the Plattsburgh Lions Club, who have played a role, and you'll hear about that. Rich Kalma, who is not able to be here today, but I want to recognize him because he's always been here. This is the first time he's missed. John Rock and the American Legion, they're here again today. The reenactors, and I never know quite sure who's going to show, but I know that P.J. Miller, Craig Russell, and Charlie Mitchell would be here, and they are here. I see John Santana, who has been part of the Flag Honor Guard in the past, is here. Mark Sand with the Boy Scouts, they're here. We're going to mention Al and Jerry because they've been here. And I could go right around all these people. The Dominy family have had representation every time we've done this. We have others that represent the people who were here during the battle, during the march at least. and we've got part of them listed. And every year I find somebody else who pops up and says, oh, my relative was part of the militia, or my relative did this or that, and some ancestor. So instead of taking these and just tossing them, please take a look at it, because these are the people that make this possible. My 27 pages of notes. (1814) September 5th, it was raining. It was not a nice day. The British were in Ingraham and Westchasey. There are actually 3 different nationalities in Ingraham. There was the Swiss, the British, and the French Canadians, who really and truly, even in 1814, were not overly happy with the British taking over Canada. And that's another story, how the War of 1812 really led to the consolidation of the Confederate of Canada. We were not Beekmantown. We were part of the town of Plattsburgh. When the British marched through here on September 6th, it was a nice day. But the day before, trying to bring troops in and trying to walk and stuff, and remember they all walked, was not a good day. September 6th, I already described to you what happened down at Ira Howe's house. John Wool wanted to slow them down here. He retreated. It was a good place to militarily take a stand. There were several killed and wounded that day between Ira Howe's and here. We have recounts of the wounded being brought into the houses. And one of the houses is across the street, which is Bill Crosby's house, but it was a falling down stone place when he took it over and renovated and restored it. We have accounts of the wounded going into the barn down at Ira Howe's house. They went on to Halsey's Corners after the stand here. It was a deadly stand for 3 officers at least and others. And from here they went to Halsey's Corners, and there'll be a ceremony there at 1 o'clock. And that was even more bloody than this spot. We have a monument that commemorates Lieutenant Colonel James Willington, Ensign John Chapman, and Corporal Stephen Partridge of the Essex Militia. Once they got to Plattsburgh, they waited. They tried going across the river here and there, but they mostly waited because it was unknown. Macomb was a real master of deception. He did all kinds of neat things. I won't tell you that story because it's not this story. But you should find out about that. How he kind of tricked the British into thinking there were actually more people than there were. And so they waited for the Navy. And on September 11th, the Navy, which was so new that on the northern side of Cumberland Head, they let the carpenters off. And they came around into Cumberland Bay, or Plattsburgh Bay. Anybody who's ever seen one of these big ships knows that you have to know what you're doing to get it to go where you want it to go. And it was a huge ship. It was a battle, rigged with lots of cannon. It was a ferocious, absolutely ferocious battle. There was one person who fought in the Battle of Plattsburgh on the British side, later said Trafalgar, which you know as a Navy man, Trafalgar was one of the big battles of the British history, was but a flea bite compared to what happened here. You probably appreciate that. And so, after the battle was decided, the British retreated rather hastily. Great criticism of Prevost at that time. But he was really following orders. 1819, this quiet little place where people were buried down at the foot of the hill in a garden. And bodies were taken and reinterred at Riverside Cemetery in Crab Island. And by the way, Crab Island, September 11th, if you have a boat or you're a real good swimmer, go over, because 1619, post 16, they do a Crab Island thing every year. It's wonderful. 1820 is when Beekmantown became established, chartered. So it was a few years after the battle, and a year after the bodies of Willington and others were removed. Not much happened. 1843, there was a dedication at Riverside. They put memorials to the British that fell here. In 1843, there was a carrying on of a tradition of showing respect for the former enemy, which started with McDonough and Macomb at the end of the Battle of Plattsburgh. That's when Brigadier General John Wool came back to Plattsburgh, and he spoke on behalf of Willington, his former foe, and talked about the bravery and the dedication. So Major John came back as Brigadier General John. By the way, he continued his career right through the Civil War. He was probably the oldest general. And when he died, they had an obituary in the New York Times that was very, very long. Now, the late 1800s, again, people were starting to forget what happened here. And one of the country doctors, Dr. David Kellogg, decided to do some interviews. Excuse me. And he interviewed Nathaniel Culver, who lived across the street. He interviewed Henry Dominey, who lived up the road where the British walked by, and where Jim Gagno's brother now owns that house, the Dawson House. And then they decided we got to do more than this, and so he formed what they call the Plattsburgh Institute. And they said we got to put up some monuments. And in 1894, this monument was placed here by the Plattsburgh. It's a 3,000-pound piece of granite that came from Barre, Vermont. I'd just like to read a quote from Kellogg, because he kept a journal. Thank goodness people kept journals, because that's the way we find out so much. This was September 22nd, 1894. And I want you to imagine this dirt road with carriages lined on either side all the way back to Plattsburgh almost. Quote, "This morning from 10 to 11 o'clock at Culver Hill, Beekmantown, were the exercises in connection with placing the monument by the Plattsburgh Institute. At least 500 people were present." Think about that, 500. Things passed off delightfully. That's the praise he gave himself. And that was it. 1930, according to Addie Shields, a well-respected Clinton County historian, Town of Beekmantown historian, said in 1930, the road that came up over the hill here, the state decided that they were going to improve it. And in so doing, they cut a notch in the road, and then took the stone walls that were part of the fields and put them in as part of the base of the new road. So it came up through. And the monument that was right beside the road, that stone by the side of the road, became on the top of a small escarpment, I guess, call it that, which went right down. It was bedrock there, went right down to the line of the shoulder of the road. There was absolutely no place to walk in the road without taking your life into your own hands. And over time, the brush grew up over. And if it wasn't for Bill Crosby, who lived across the street, and I think it was your lawnmower, it was about the width of a lawnmower, mowed the grass up to the, so you could see, if you're really, really careful and you're really, really quick-eyed, you could see that monument when you drove by. Well, Joe and Roy Carter in about 2002 were looking for the place that their ancestor, Willington, died. they were in Montreal, and they decided to come on down and see if they could find it, because they knew that he died here during the Battle of Plattsburgh. They found out where the monument was from Richard Green down in the Interpretive Center at the time, the future War of 1812 Museum. And he said, well, it's right on Route 22. You just drive out there. Well, they drove by it 3 times and they couldn't see it. So later on, they ran into Kit Booth, who was a co-chair of the Battle of Plattsburgh commemoration. He and I eventually became notorious for that. Kit said, yeah, we just had a big commemoration. And by the way, that word commemoration, I think, speaks volumes, because that's one of the things that turned me on to the Battle of Plattsburgh commemoration, is that it was not a celebration, it was not a festival, it was a recognition of people on both sides that dedicated their lives to this. And so the Carters found out about the commemoration. And the next year they came back with the invitation of Kit to see what was going on. And that was 2003. Well, by then, being part of the leadership of the Battle of Plattsburgh commemoration, the bicentennial, I knew what was going to happen, and I knew that having this monument was going to have a draw, and I knew that somebody was going to get killed on that road, because there's no way you can walk. So we talked to Addie Shield, and we talked to the neighbors, we talked to Bill, we talked to Sue Connick, we talked to Gladys Fortin, who owned the land. And we came up with an idea, with a plan for a park. And we talked to Dennis Relation, who was the town supervisor. And we talked to, of course, Addie was a part of it, but we talked to Dennis Hulbert, who was the president of the Beekman Lions Club. Because I know that municipalities they don't have a single historic park are going to say, well, how much is it going to cost the taxpayers and the town and stuff? I know how that is. And so if we had the land donated, it wouldn't have cost anything. If we could put the park in at minimal expense, but if we could save that monument, because while we were discussing that, the DOT, New York State Department of Transportation, was going to improve the road yet again. And surely it needed it. I mean, it was narrow through there. And so they, as always, have hearings. Well, we had 2 or 3 ceremonies representing. The Lions Club cleaned out the brush. The town hauled it away. So now you could see the monument. And if you see any of the pictures of some of the first ones, the monument is on the other side of that wall, up on the ledge. And we met down in the Connick's yard. And we parked our cars up at the 410's barnyard. And they were there, and they were very, very supportive. So when the DOT came, we went to the meetings, and we said, we have a historic location there, and we don't want to lose it. And this is the plan. Bill was there, he had aerial views and stuff like that. Addie was there, there was a group. Dennis was there, both Dennises, Dennis Relation, Dennis Hulbert. And as a result of that, the DOC, and I sent them stacks of documentation. Anything I could think of, really, because you got to prove to the people further up that this is valid. And so the DOC said, okay, or DOT says, okay, we're going to make a park and we'll do it for you. Well, that was nice. Well, it takes time, of course. They started these hearings in 2006. And the first ceremony was held here in 2008. It wasn't quite finished yet. But not only did they save the monument, because really it was part of the state right away. If they didn't know what it was, it could have ended up as part of the fill like the stone walls did. And I told them that stone wall was also very important. That was probably the stone wall that people stood behind. So they took the stone wall and they moved it over to Bill's lot across the road. And they took the monument, they took it away, but they came back And they put all of this in here, this patio affair. This is all New York State. And you know, we always hear stories about how it's so difficult to work with the bureaucracy, but if you work with it, you know, if we showed up that day that the trucks came out, that wouldn't have been the time. We had to go to the hearings and provide that. We couldn't have had more cooperation, folks. And so they did the berms, they did the trees, they did the benches that some of you are sitting on. They brought that trough, which was down at the bottom of the hill, and they said, well, instead of just throwing it away, we thought it was historic. It was from the 1800s. They put these stones here when they blasted. They said, we thought it'd be nice to have some Culver Hill sitting out like that. I mean, a lot of thought went into that, above and beyond, and I have to give credit again for them. 2009 was a formal dedication. There was still stone here, though, and over the years, the town kicked in. Let me tell you, there's a lot of asphalt right here because the Lions Club had agreed to maintain it. We mowed. On one day, I came up with their push mower that was provided. It took me 4.5 hours. This is a big spot. I thought, well, it's got a lot of driveway and stuff. No, it still took me 4.5 hours. I think it was 95 degrees that day. I said, never again. But the Lions would come with their mowers on their wagons, and they would mow it. And we did that until the Beekmantown Lions went out of business. 2011, there were 2 interpretive signs. One down at the first bloody encounter and the other one over here. Because we said, you know, people are pulling in and all they see is this monument. They have no clue as to what happened. And the Champlain Valley National Heritage Partnership and Lake Champlain Basin Program had grants available, so we ended up, I applied, and I got 2 grants, one for here and one for First Encounter, and those were put in 2011. Jim Brannigan was made that important. 2013 was a big year because then I wanted to have a little bit more. I wanted to tell the story about the people a little bit more, because anybody who does these interpretive panels, you're limited to 250 words. I can't say hello in 250 words. And so I wanted to tell the story about the people, and that was one panel. I wanted to tell the story about the monument, and that was another panel. And at the same time, because Rich Kalma and his connections, he got the flagpole donated from the woodmen of the world. And that was in 2013. Tim Gagnon was responsible for that, and with Rich. And on the outside there is a historic marker, and that something on the road beside our sign, which really faces the wrong way, to let people know that something happened here. Because when they see those blue markers, they go, oh, something happened here. Oh, there's a driveway. I think I'll pull in. And so that was because of the grant by the William G. Pomeroy Foundation. Again, the extended community. But what you see here is a community effort, whether it was a state effort or foundation efforts, or even people in Vermont with the Lake Champlain Basin program where they have their headquarters. So in 2014, the 200th anniversary of the Battle of Plattsburgh, the 200th anniversary of Culver Hill, we had our ceremony and we rededicated the monument that was here. And I just want you to know, because we don't know, when you start getting up in years like I am, you start thinking, I want somebody else to know about this so that when I'm gone, and I know Addie thought this way, because I would go for a ride with Addie. If you went for a ride with Addie, that means that you had a running commentary from the moment you got in the car to the moment you got out. And she would point things out to me. I wish I had a recorder, because I can only take so much in. And that's where I heard so many stories. And I'm sure she was saying, this guy shows interest. I want to tell him these stories. I want to tell you these stories. You're here. Today, the Beekmantown Lions Club is no longer, but the Plattsburgh Lion Club agreed to take up the cause. And so the flower gardens that you see here have been maintained by the Plattsburgh Lions Club. The town picked up the cost of, sends the maintenance man to come, Rich Bois, who does a beautiful job mowing and stuff. That stone wall, by the way, anybody who has a stone wall like that in their yard knows this is bad because the grass grows up beside it. It means you got to trim. But that was rebuilt by the state. Now that was somebody who knew how to build stone walls. I built stone walls. They don't look like that. And that is the original stone. So if you happen to go over and touch it, you're touching something that was here over 200 years ago that was used as a defense. Now the Carters, they kept coming back. Year after year after year, they kept coming back. And I have to say, we became good friends. My wife still emails with Joe every day. There's not a lot you can talk about other than the weather, but they talk about the weather every day, what's going on over in Marlborough, England, and what's going on here. In the last 2 or 3 years, they could not come because of COVID. And now their age, it's just too difficult for them. But Joe came, and Roy, when Joe couldn't come one year, every year, and put down the wreath from the bus, the British side, every year for about 18 years. She crawled up that hill when the monument was there. And a lot of people don't know this, but the Carters didn't want a lot of publicity, but they donated a lot to this community over the years. Anybody who went to Riverside, ever seen the monuments there? The ones, because the stand-up ones that were put there in the 1800s were hard to read, they purchased the ones down on the ground for every single British soldier there. Crab Island, there are monuments to the Americans, as there should be, but there wasn't something for the Brits that are buried there. And that's very unusual to have enlisted people buried literally side by side. We're not even just side by side. We're talking about individuals put side by side. And Joe and Roy thought we should have that publicized. So they got a stone along with Robinson, who was one of the big generals at the time, a descendant of Robinson. The money went to that stone. They funded the video that was done in 2014, and all proceeds went back to the communication, or to the commemoration. They didn't want a penny of it. They just wanted people to have it. The list could go on of the things that they did that nobody really knew about. But we miss their presence most of all. And I'd like to wrap up with just a little ditty that Joe wrote. We keep them posted. Every year we send them stuff. When they came, they would leave almost with a small suitcase of materials. And so the last 3 years, when the code was here and we still had sort of commemoration events, we would get all the materials we could, the brochures, anything, and we would mail it to them. And yes, my wife Billy is collecting that right now, and we'll be mailing the Carters the program, the glossy booklet, articles from the newspaper, whatever. And this is what Joe wrote. As always, nice to hear about the Culver Hill plans, and I know that all of you will commemorate it. We always loved the ceremony, and we did feel we were part of the little park. Sorry, getting sentimental in my old age. And of course, we would love to be there with you. It's the stone by the side of the road that has brought us together and continues to do so. Thank you for your indulgence, but I want to tell that story. And so here we are, 19 ceremonies and over 20 years ago when we started this. We've had 3 supervisors, all of them supportive. We've had many different board members, and we have some board members here today. All of them supportive. We've had Lions clubs, 2 different groups, supportive. Dennis Hulbert was here parking cars. He had to go because I had to do something. He had not missed a single time where he was here volunteering. Bob Walker, who is one of those Beekmantown gonna mow the lawn people, here again helping with parking. All the volunteers. Craig Russell, I cannot say enough about Craig Russell. I've known him since we started this gig back in 1998, and he's always there. The bagpipers, Jerry and Al, every year they volunteer. Thank you. Rich, who couldn't be here. John Rock and his merry men, that's what I call him. John Santana is here, who's part of the Honor Guard for many, many years. The Battle of Plattsburgh Commemoration Committee, and now the new organization, the 1814 Commemoration, Inc. Continuing the tradition. And I got to thank my wife, Billy, because she's been here every year. Every time I went to a meeting, she was supportive. Every time that we did something, one time she said, I'm going to be so happy when the Battle of Plattsburgh is over because we'll be able to do something in September. Well, we still can't do it on certain days, but part of it is cleared up, so. Thank you, one and all. Thank you to this community, and thank you for the continuation of the traditions we're here. We'd now like to have the laying of the wreaths, and we are honored to have Lieutenant Commander Douglas Laird, who will lay the wreath for the British, and his wife Lorna is here. And I told you, it's Russell. I keep forgetting his name. Russell Dominy, whose family was here on the day of the attack.
Oops. Yeah. You mentioned the Carters up at Bob Ben Park near Dewey Tavern. They provided us with a British flag for the ceremonies we have there, commemorating the
I've instructed them on how to do the
invasion
photo op, so we
of
don't have to rush.
1814. And the flagpole was donated by Woodmen of the
I have
World.
to tell you, yesterday at Riverside, my wife and I laid a wreath. It's the first time I've ever done that. It's not as easy as it looks. See? Something always happens.
And the 15-star, 15-stripe flag was also made available by Woodmen of the World. So
And now, since cannon are still allowed, we're going to fire a salute to those that died here. Now taps.
Alan Walker and Jerry Tatro.
Thank you very much for coming. Take part in the rest of the events of the Battle of Plattsburgh. It's still going on. Tomorrow they'll be down at City Hall, still be parades and everything else. So please take part. Have a safe trip home, folks.
Over the years, we have missed one or two of these events, but for the most part, we've been here right from the very get-go, and hope to continue to cover these into the future. As we said, they started the Battle of Plattsburgh Committee in 1998, but in 1997 we talked to reenactors Craig Russell and a few others, and a historian, and we learned a lot back in '97, even before the festivities started to go on a regular basis. Well, thanks for watching and supporting Hometown Cable. TV is worthy of your support, and we'll say hello to the Carters, who will be sharing this link like we've shared so many others to them over the years, so they get to see it via the internet.